Some stories begin with a scream, others with a whisper, but this one began with silence, not the peaceful kind that lingers over a sleeping house, or the gentle hush that falls after snowfall. No, this was a heavy, aching silence, one that clung to the walls, stretched across the hours, and settled like dust in every room. It was the kind of silence that feels alive, the kind born from something torn away, and for weeks, that silence was broken only by the soft shuffle of a child's feet and the quiet, steady breathing of a scarred German shepherd at her side. 6-year-old Leah Thompson had once filled the world with sound. Her laugh could bounce off walls and rise above lawnmowers, birdsong, and summer rain. She was the sort of child who turned cardboard boxes into castles, who made up stories mid-sentence, who asked questions that made grown-ups pause. But all that vanished one bright spring afternoon. That afternoon did not look like danger. It looked like safety. The breeze was soft and warm, the kind that lifted loose hair and carried the scent of lilacs down the block. Sunlight painted golden ribbons across the backyard, and the hum of bees threaded lazily through the fresh-cut air. Leah spun in her pink dress, arms outstretched like wings. Her bare feet skipped across the grass, and her voice, clear, high, joyful, filled the backyard with imaginary tales of brave knights and invisible dragons. Inside the house, her mother Julia stood at the kitchen window, watching. Her hand rested on the sink, and a half-cut cucumber waited on the counter. For a moment, she allowed herself a small smile. It had been a hard week. Bills, work, arguments with her husband. But here now, she could breathe. The phone rang. She checked the caller. It her sister in Colorado. Just a quick call. Julia glanced back at the yard, saw Leah twirling, then stepped into the other room with the phone pressed to her ear. Hey, I've only got a second. For minutes. That's how long the call lasted. When Julia returned to the window, the gate was open. Her brain hesitated, tried to explain it away. A breeze? Had it not latched all the way? But something in her gut turned cold. Her heart began to pound. Leah was no longer alone. A man crouched beside her, kneeling, speaking in a voice too soft to hear through the glass. There was a van parked by the curb. Black, plain, no markings. Its side door hung slightly open, like an open mouth waiting to swallow. At first, Julia's mind scrambled for logic. Maybe he was lost? Maybe. Then she saw it. His hand, slowly reaching toward her daughter's wrist. His lips moving. I have puppies in my van, he was saying. Special ones. Want to see? Julia's scream ripped from her throat with primal force. Leah, the man's head snapped toward the house. His expression dropped. No smile, only calculation now. Cold, mechanical. His hand clamped onto Leah's wrist in one smooth, practiced movement. Leah did not scream. She didn't cry. She just stared up at him, eyes wide, body frozen. Across the street, 73-year-old Martha Bell, walking her terrier, saw everything. Her voice, scratchy with age but fierce with fury, cracked the still air like a whip. Hey, get away from her. It was just enough. The man hesitated, and Leah moved. She yanked back, twisted just enough to slip from his grip, and ran, legs pumping, arms flailing. Julia met her halfway across the lawn, scooping her up as the van peeled off, tires screeching, vanishing into the trees at the edge of the neighborhood. Leah didn't look back. She didn't cry out. She buried her face in her mother's shoulder and trembled. From that day forward, Leah Thompson never spoke again. Not a sound, not a whisper. The hours that followed blurred into sirens and shouts, flashing lights reflecting off kitchen cabinets, and uniformed officers moving briskly through the house. Julia clutched Leah close while detectives scoured the backyard, measured footprints, and knocked on doors. Special Agent Tom Monroe arrived just after dusk. He had 23 years of experience in missing child investigations. He'd seen the same pattern too many times. A black van, a smooth-talking predator, a brief window of opportunity. Most families weren't as lucky, but even though Leah had escaped, the damage wasn't undone. She hadn't spoken since. Doctors called it selective mutism, a psychological shutdown in response to trauma. Therapists offered strategies. Julia tried games, gentle prompting, even music. Nothing reached her. And then Bruno arrived. Bruno was a retired police canine, once praised for his courage during a string of high-risk narcotics raids. He bore scars on his leg and ear, remnants of the night his partner was taken down by a shotgun blast during a warehouse bust. Bruno had lunged between his handler and the bullet. He survived. His partner didn't. Since then, Bruno hadn't been the same. Like Leia, he'd stopped engaging, withdrawn, distrustful, considered unadoptable by most. But Julia, desperate, and searching for anything that might help her daughter, brought him home. The bond wasn't immediate, but it was real. Bruno didn't demand Leia talk. He didn't flinch at her silence. He simply stayed. He followed her like a quiet guardian, curled beside her bed, shadowed her through hallways, stood watch beside her chair while she colored. Slowly, she began to breathe easier, to sleep, to eat, to smile, and then something changed again. What began as healing turned into something more. A journey toward justice. A court battle. A chance to speak truth, even if she couldn't use her voice. And Bruno would be there through it all. This wasn't just a recovery. It was a story of trust reborn. Of a child who had lost her voice, and a dog who had never needed words to be heard. Did what troubled Monroe most wasn't thieving or the vague eyewitness descriptions. It was Leia. She didn't scream, she didn't flinch, she didn't cry. She simply folded into herself, quiet and unreachable, as if Simeon had turned off a switch. At the kitchen table, Julia sat clutching a warm cup of untouched coffee, her hands trembling. Ben, her husband, paced the hallway just outside, his jaw clenched so tight he could barely speak. "She won't even look at me," Julia whispered, staring at her daughter curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanketized blanket. "It's like she's not here." Julia felt a kind of pain she couldn't name, an ache that lived somewhere deep in her chest. It wasn't just fear, it was grief for a child who was still physically there, but emotionally gone, and worse, it was guilt that she hadn't gotten outside sooner, that she hadn't sensed something was wrong, that their baby had come back, but not whole. Patently suggested trauma. Said selective mutism, a psychologist, to overwhelming fear, but that knowledge didn't make it easier to bear. Over the next few days, Leia stopped doing everything she once loved. She stopped playing, stopped drawing, refused to go outside. Even the sound of a delivery truck would send her diving beneath the bed at night. She tossed and turned, caught in silent nightmares. No screams, just gasps, sharp, breathless, terrified. The case stalled. There were no fingerprints, no useful surveillance footage, just a scared little girl who couldn't tell them what she'd seen. Orwo, and the longer the silence stretched, the further away justice felt. Their commendation came late one night, when Julia sat across from Ben at the kitchen table, her face pale and hollow with exhaustion. She stirred her tea with oat, drinking it, eyes unfocused. "The therapist mentioned something today," she said quietly. "She thinks maybe a therapy animal." Ben blinked. "A dog," she said. "It might help rebuild trust, make Leia feel safe again. At this point, I'm willing to try anything." A few days later, they found themselves at Dr. Naomi Green's Animal Therapy Center, a quiet facility nestled at the edge of town. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and worm fur. It was there they met Bruno. He was a large German shepherd sitting motionless on a padded mat near the window. His fur was peppered with gray and a long scar ran down his right side, jagged and angry looking, a clear reminder of something violent. "His name's Bruno," Dr. Green said gently. "Used to be a an officer 3 years ago, was injured during a child rescue mission, knife wound. He saved the child, but the injury ended his career. They were going to put him down." Julia's heart clenched. "But you stopped that," Dr. Green added. "He still got sharp instincts, and something tells me he has more to give." Leia stood behind her mother, half hidden, staring at the dog. Bruno didn't move, head didn't bark. He simply watched her, eye steady, calm, no pressure, no judgment. On Leia, she felt something stir in the quiet space between them, something she couldn't explain. There was a heaviness in his eyes that mirrored her own, not pity, not fear, just understanding. Like heck knew what it meant to be hurt, and not of the words for it. She didn't know but she trusted him. Maybe it was the way he didn't look away, maybe it was like her he looked, like so many knew had. been left behind. She didn't feel afraid when she looked at him for the first time in weeks. She felt seen and safe. "You don't have to come close," Dragreen said softly, just when your ready. Leia didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either, and somehow, that wasn't the first meeting ended with silence, but not the kind that cruised the air from a room. This silence felt different, lighter, like a door had opened just an inch. The next day, Julia brought Leia back. They sat in the same room. Bruno, ever patient, lay in the same spot, didn't move when they entered, didn't wag his tail or make a sound. He simply acknowledged Leela with a blink, then rested his head back on his paws, as if to say, "Here when you're ready." Dragreen gave no instructions, offered no expectations, just time. Leia stood closer that day, just a few feet from him. She didn't speak, but for the first time her fingers twitched ever so slightly at her side, and Bruno noticed his ears perked, but he remained still and went on like that for days. Small movements, little shifts, a breath closer, a blink longer. Then one afternoon, something Shangadila knelt on the rug, her tiny hand stretched out, trembling but deliberate. Bruno lifted his head, his eyes met her steady and sure. He rose slowly, padded forward, and gently pressed his nose into her palm. The contact was soft, almost accidental, but it broke something up, and Leia let out a shaky breath. She hadn't realized she was holding. Then, without warning, she wrapped both arms around Bruno's neck and buried her face into his fur. Her shoulders trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of everything she'd been holding. "In?" Julia gasped from across the room, hands flying to her mouth. Her daughter hadn't took another living thing since the incident. Bruno stood still, quiet and grounded. He didn't move. He didn't need to. For the first time since that spring afternoon, Leela had chosen to reach out, not with words, but with trust, and Bruno caught her while Leela and Bruno began the slow work of healing. Agent Tom Monroe hadn't stopped working. The case had stalled for weeks. No fingerprints, no footage, no DNA, just one terrified child who couldn't speak, and a vague eyewitness account from Martha Bell, the elderly neighbor who had seen the man's face for only a second, enough to say he was white, average build, wearing a dark hoodie. Nothing that could hold up in court. But Martha hadn't given up. She'd insisted. She remembered part of Thelicent's plate kib. The letters came to her late one night as she lay awake, going over them in her mind. It wasn't much, but it was something. Monroe ran the partial plate through every database he had access to after days of cross-referencing vehicle registrations and narrowing the search by model and region. Name stood out: Simon Vale, a 44-year-old freelance software engineer with no criminal record, no family, an uneasy habit of relocating every 6 months. When Monroe pulled his file, something didn't sit right. The man's movements crisscrossed with several other missing child reports, none ever solved. He visited Simon's neighborhood, a quiet man, polite, nothing odd, nothing that screamed predator. But Monroe had seen this before. How normal hid the worst kind of monsters. There wasn't enough to make an arrest, but there was enough to dig deeper. So Monroe circled back to Julia. "How's Leia doing?" he asked gently. Julia hesitated. "She's better. She still doesn't talk, but she's not afraid all the time anymore. Not with Bruno around." Monroe's expression shifted slightly. "Then maybe," he said, "we just found our strongest lead." The lead was fragile, but it was enough. Following the plate match and the discovery of Simon Vale's suspicious travel history, Agent Monroe submitted a formal request for surveillance. The more they looked, the more off things became. Vales's vague work history, empty tax records, and a van that matched the one described by Martha Bell to the inch, still without physical evidence or a verbal witness. It wasn't enough to indict. That's when Monroe made a bold move. He brought what little they had before a judge to request a per-trial hearing, arguing for probable cause. The courtroom was unnervingly quiet as 6-year-old Leia stepped through heavy double doors, her hand clutching the leash of Bruno, the scared German shepherd who never left her side. She moved slowly, cautiously, as if each step forward carried the weight of everything she couldn't say. The polished wood floor echoed beneath her shoes, and every eye in the room followed her, some with sympathy, others with skepticism. Bruno walked beside her in perfect sync, alert but calm. His deep brown eyes scanned the space ahead, tail low and steady. His body language said one thing: here. Judge Elliot Graves' Asenson figure on the bench leaned forward slightly. He didn't speak. He simply watched as Leia made her way toward the front where her mother helped her into the witness chair. Leia's small frame was nearly swallowed by the large wooden seat. Her legs dangled above the floor, and her eyes stayed fixed on the polished edge of the table. And then without warning, she placed one hand on Bruno's back, just resting it there. Her fingers curled into his fur. Bruno remained still, but his ears perked and his muscles tensed. Judge Elliot Graves proceeded, stern, seasoned, and skeptical of theatrics. The presence of a therapy dog in his courtroom was unusual, but after reading the documentation from Dr. Naomi Green and Leia's therapist, he allowed it. Bruno was more than emotional support. He was Leia's anchor. When Simon Valle entered the room flanked by his attorney, Leia froze. She didn't cry or flinch, just stared. Motions. Bruno lifted his head, his eyes locked onto Simon's like radar finding a signal. He didn't growl, didn't bark, but he watched the defense move. Tohavi, the dog, removed, calling him prejudicial. The prosecution, led by Adaracal Connors, stood firm. Your Honor, this child has been diagnosed with trauma-induced selective mutism. She cannot communicate like other witnesses, but she can respond through cues. Through the presence of Bruno. Judge Graves paused, considering. Motion denied, he said. At last, the dog stays. The trial was only in its preliminary stage. Witnesses would be called, evidence would be challenged, but that day, in that moment, something undeniable passed between a silent child and a watchful dog. When Leia reached down and touched Bruno's back, his tail thumped on against the floor, soft but certain. And in the other side of the courtroom, for just a flicker of a second, Simon Vale stopped smiling. Ada Rachel Connor stepped forward gently, careful not to startle the child. Leia, she said, her voice like a whisper in the hush, do you see the man who came into your yard that day? You don't have to speak. You can just look or point. Leia didn't respond right away. Then slowly, her gaze lifted and her eyes found Simon Vale. The moment their eyes met, something in her shifted. Her breath caught in her throat. Her shoulders tightened. Her hands balled into fists. It felt like the air in the room had vanished. The color drained from her face. She wasn't sitting in a courtroom anymore. She was back in Harryard, back in that bright, horrible afternoon. The smell of flowers, the sound of birds, the van, the smile that wasn't kind at all, the hand that gripped her wrist, the voice that promised puppies, and the terror that swallowed her whole. Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. She looked like she might fold into herself all over again. And then Bruno moved, slowly, silently. The old German shepherd stood and pressed himself against her side. No words, no sounds, just quiet strength. Leela looked down at him. Their eyes met, and in that look, she heard him not with her ears, but with something deeper, as if he were saying, right here, you don't have to be afraid anymore. Know what it's like to be hurt, but we don't run, not this time. Be brave, I'm with you. The fear didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled her. She placed her hand gently on Bruno's head, felt his warmth, his calm. She drew in one long, shaky breath, and then she turned. She lifted her hand and pointed. Her voice came next, soft, uncertain, cracking under the weight of silence long held. But it came. It's him, she whispered. There was a pause. The room didn't move. Then her voice rose, not loud, but steadier. It's him. He's Theon. The words echoed like thunder in still courtroom. Gasps followed. The stenographer dropped her pen. One juror blinked away. Tears. A heavy silence settled over the room. Even the air felt still, and on the bench Julia's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled before she even realized they were coming. It wasn't just relief, it was heartbreak in her daughter's voice. She heard all the pain Leia had carried in silence, all the nights she couldn't reach her, all the guilt she couldn't name, but now her little girl had spoken, and somehow the tone's small sentence made everything hurt and begin to heal. I wasn't just the words, it was the fact that they had come from her, from a child who hadn't spoken in weeks, and all it took was a dog who refused to leave her side. The courtroom emptied slowly that day, but no one forgot what they witnessed. Simon Valle didn't confess, he didn't cry, but Aslila's words echoed through Thechambers. Something in him cracked, and for the first time, the weight of his silence was heavier than hers. Leia's testimony stood alone, soft, but unshakable. It was enough. In the days that followed, investigators uncovered matching tire tracks, fibers found in Vale's van, and patterns linking him to their unsolved attempts in neighboring counties. Piece by piece, the puzzle closed, and when it did, there was not out left. Simon Vale was the man watched to take Leela. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But what mattered most didn't make the headline. It lived in the quiet victory of a little girl who found her voice, and the dog who helped her believe it mattered. That night, Julia tucked her daughter into bed for weeks. This had been the hardest part of the day. Leia would lie still, wide-eyed, trapped in memories, shackled and share. But this time Bruna curled up beside her, and this time just before Julia turned off the light. Ella spoke. "Mom." Julie froze. "Yes, baby." A beat. "Then can Bruno stay with me all night?" Julia's throat tightened, shenaned, her voice too full to speak. Leela wrapped her arms around the shepherd's neck, whispering something only he could hear, and as Bruno laid his head beside her, eyes closing in quiet watch, the house fell into a silence no longer filled with fear. It was the silence of safety, of something stronger than fear, the voice of a child, and the loyalty of a dog finally heard.